Chinese professors are often at their best on smoke breaks, and I encountered one puffing away outside the Shanghai archives a few years ago. Unprompted by me, he launched into a tirade all about democracy. Pfft, democracy, he said. It's terrible. We tried that in China in 1949, and look what it did to us. A disaster. And he was referring here to the Communist Revolution in 49. And what did he mean? Well, one way of understanding democracy is rule where the masses of the people are put in charge and get a say. And if you were an urban, educated Shanghainese man, one way of understanding the events of that time is that an army of adolescents marched their way from the countryside into the cities and installed themselves in power, and maybe from that point of view did not do a very good job. And this professor went on and he said, look, it took us 30 years to overthrow them and get those people out of power. I hope China never goes back to a democracy again. And here he meant that by the 1980s, a generation and a half or so later, the party had changed its orientation, become a little bit more professionalized, and that those people from the rural areas were no longer necessarily at the top or calling the shots. Now, I should say that this guy was joking on the square, by which I mean he was being humorous and I was laughing through the whole thing, but he was also communicating some serious ideas, right? And that if you are an urban and educated Chinese person like this guy, what might democracy look like for you? Well, there are 400 million or so middle-class Chinese, but there are also, 800 million people in the countryside, farmers, sometimes less politely called peasants. And in a real democracy, they'll outvote you every single time. And that's not certainly what this professor I spoke to wanted. Most interestingly, though, to think about are the ways in which his words were so impolitic in at least two very different contexts. On the one hand, to an American, I think to hear that the idea of a profound democracy would look and feel a lot like the Chinese Revolution of 1949, a communist one at that, would be very shocking. On the other hand, his words were quite impolitic in the modern Chinese context, where that sort of elitist expression of disdain for the common people, farmers, peasants, and so on, might be thought and felt privately, but should not be expressed publicly. And then he crushed his cigarette and went back to work.